What up, y'all? This is Patrick Hayes, and today what I want to do is I want to answer a question. I was asked a question by a girl, amazing girl I did a session with just about a week and a half ago. She asked me a question regarding the idea of oneness and how that appropriately fits into our everyday life regarding relationships and how we interact with other people. And I thought this was a really good question because this is something that if there's not clearly defined distinctions made here, the crossover can be inappropriate. And then the crossover between our idea of separate self and how that shows up in our everyday life, and the idea of oneness and all of us being one and all of us being connected, and how that shows up in our life, they can get misconstrued and create a certain level of delusion and highly reduce our capacity for pragmatic living. So I want to talk a little bit about these two distinctive perspectives, how they're both true in their own way, and then also how we can let them overlap in an unhealthy way in our everyday life that leads to delusion and other sorts of problems that we can run into. So, first what I want to talk about is the two distinct states. So, when we talk about oneness and this experience of oneness, the experience of being the all, right? Sometimes we hear it referred to as, being the ultimate creator of our reality to the point where we are the projector. And as we're walking through our reality, we are actually projecting the screen, and everything in our reality is, in a sense, a projection coming from us, right? So in that sense, we're a creator of our reality, and actually this is where it can get confusing, that we're actually creating every single minute detail in our physical reality. Now, while on a level that's true, it can become very, very confusing if misinterpreted and acted upon from a limited perspective. Now, the other side to it is the apparent experience of being a separate, sovereign, autonomous being, where we walk through the world and we have our own isolated thoughts, we have our own isolated feelings, we have our own isolated experience of the world, and our own opinions and perspectives, and there's this experience of being a separate being. And we're all very familiar with this because this is essentially the default state that we're walking around in. Now, yes, of course, there's bleed through in the emotions, and there's bleed through in thoughts, and there's psychic intuitions, and there's levels in which these things blend. But ultimately, everybody knows what I'm talking about when we talk about we have the experience of being separate human beings, right? Now, when we talk about the oneness state, this oneness state and all the ideology surrounding it comes from the mystical experiences of being able to move into the causal realm witness experience. Because in this mystical state, our ego identity drops away completely. And when our ego identity drops away, and we basically step back into the grand oversoul. And from the grand oversoul's perspective, which is our true identity, and that is a truth, but when we step into that grand oversoul perspective, we are everything, and we are all consciousness. And we experience that as a visceral, mystical, kind of religious experience, right? We feel that. And there's a truth to it that's unwavering, right? Yet at the same time, when we walk around on a daily basis, we have an experience of being a separate being, right? So how do we kind of bring these two things together in a healthy balance? Well, what's important is for us to understand that these are both true from their own perspective. And so it's important for us to kind of discreetly identify which perspective is most appropriate for the particular circumstance. Because here's the issue. If we're walking around in our ego identity, meaning we're basically walking around as a separate, sovereign, autonomous being in the physical world, and we're dealing with our everyday life like, this person acted this way, or this person did this, or this person did that, or I have a goal to do this to make my life better, or to share this with another person. We're walking around in our everyday mentality, but we're framing it too much from the perspective of we're all one. Then what happens is we're trying to understand, or we're trying to interpret a reality from a higher mystical state while we're in a ego state. So we're still in our ego identity, yet we're trying to interpret something from a state where ego has been dissolved. And the problem with that is it can create a lot of delusion as we're walking around. One of the things it can do is it can create this kind of level of hyper-narcissism where we think that we are literally creating every single action or instance or minute detail in our reality. That we're actually like creating it in that moment. Now, while from one perspective we are, when we step back into that mystical, causal realm state, we are. But when we're walking around with our regular ego identity, that ego identity is not creating all of the details and all of the dispositions and all the interactions in our reality. The ego is its own separate kind of identity structure. And this is where people get tripped up, is they start to think that the them that is their ego, that they identify themselves with, the ego identity, is the creator of all minute details and all interactions and all things. Like, their ego is the projector that's projecting the hologram. And that's just not true. And like I said, when we start getting into that state of thinking that the ego is creating everything because we're perceiving it from the ego perspective, we become highly narcissistically delusional. And we start taking undue responsibility for everything. A lot of actual schizophrenic behavior can operate from this. And a lot of people going through their awakening can have schizophrenic episodes where hypersynchronicities start happening. And then because they're seeing all these synchronicities that are aligning with the thoughts that they're thinking, there becomes an over-attachment to the idea that since I'm all one, I'm creating every little detail here, and it can become really overwhelming and actually lead them down a path of somewhat psychotic behavior. Now, like I said, from a certain perspective of higher self, we are creating all of these things. But it's important for us to realize that when we're not in the mystical state of seeing all of reality from that unified perspective, that's egoless, that's shed our ego, and we're not actually in that causal realm, that mystical non-dual or even non-dual experience. When we're not in that state, then we're not actually capable of perceiving as the creator of all things. And so, and that actually becomes very impractical to try to walk around and use your ego identity to say that you're creating all these things. You can see other delusions play out this way. There's been some funny stuff that people will conclude by entertaining the idea of being the creator of all, but entertaining it through their ego structure. One of the funny stories that has happened recently was there was a guy after a festival that was stealing everybody's cameras. He started taking everyone's cameras, and when people were like, wait, where's my phone? Like, I don't know where it is. Eventually, like, the attention turned to him, and he was like, oh, well, we're like all one. This is all one fam, right? And it's like, another interpretation of that is how I've seen, there's been another person that was here in Sedona that was stealing stuff from Chocolate Tree, which is a local organic spot. And he was saying that, we're all one, and he was taking it to redistribute it to poor people that needed food. But it was like, okay, this is a total misinterpretation of the idea of we're all one. It's the ego structure taking the idea that we're all one, and it's basically warping that idea to fit the ego structure. So thank you so much. This is Patrick Hayes. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I'll talk to you next time. If you liked the video you just saw and you want to support me in bringing more content like that to you, donate to my Patreon page. There's a link pinned in the comments below, and when you donate to the page, you get access to all sorts of cool giveaways, like exclusive content, free music downloads, monthly group chats with me, and more. Now, every single donation that comes in goes directly to improving the quality and the quantity of my content. So thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you on the flip side.